My game is broken. Last time I talked about Ribbit Rogue, my dice deck building roguelike being made for the Playdate, I was ready to release the initial demo. Almost instantly after release, people were reporting game-breaking bugs and overall issues with the design. That's not to say everything is bad though, as most people seem to enjoy the concept and general gameplay, but I was definitely a long way away from being done with this project. There were some bugs people were reporting that caused crashes, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but unfortunately there was also an issue with the saving system, so each crash would basically lose people's entire progress on a run. These weren't too bad to fix, but definitely not the first impressions I wanted to give people of my game. There were plenty of gameplay and design changes people brought up too, so there was a lot to tackle. Chief among those things though, was the fact that the gameplay loop I wanted to create just didn't work at all. Basically, as you add dice to your pool, the odds of drawing the ones you actually want go way down. I mean, that makes sense, and it's why I added the remove die option in the shop, but you can only do that once per visit. I mean, it's so bad that skilled players ended up just never taking new dice. They weren't huge upgrades, and they only really got a lot better when you have a lot of them, so all you're doing by taking new dice was just increasing the chances you draw unlucky and lose. Eventually, I came up with the idea of having a fixed dice pool of just 10. Then, anytime you get a new die, you have to swap it with another one in your pool to keep it. This helps keep things more consistent and maintains focus on putting together those dice synergies and getting a bit more control over the outcomes of the player's dice pool construction. That was the biggest problem that came up, but there were still some other larger changes that people were looking for. One thing I heard a lot was that there were some really confusing parts about how the combat worked, so I put together a new tutorial fight that walks you through how battles work when you first load up the game. One thing that seemed to confuse players was that you got a new die every 3 battles and a relic every 2 mandatory ones, and to be honest, that is a bit confusing. Now though, since I no longer have to worry about overloading the player with too many dice, I can just have a reward at the end of every battle. When it comes to relics, I added in an XP and leveling system. So now you get a relic when you start a run, and every time you level up, you get a new one. I updated the map generation, so now each area will have 2 mandatory visits to the shop. The shop also had the health and dice removal options replaced with a lever you can pay to reroll what dice are in the shop. Speaking of rerolling dice, you no longer have to lock and reroll dice in battles. Each reroll will now only roll 1 die at a time, as the rerolls were just too powerful before. This is an indie game after all, so I got to work creating a new fishing event where you have the chance of getting gold, a new die, or even a relic if you complete the minigame. If you open the menu, you can now see lifetime stats, and there's also a new option to pull up a list of all the current dice in your pool. Then just came a ton more polishing that I could run through rapid fire. There's a new scene transition that got much faster, a squash and stretch on enemies taking damage along with a custom font for better damage numbers, particles when healing and updated enemy death particles, an updated main menu with an intro animation, map highlight circles to show where you can go next, a warning pop-up if you try to start a new run, and last but not least, I finally got around to putting a bunch of sound effects all throughout the game. That was a lot to get through, but it's still not all. You may have noticed, some of the enemies are no longer infringing on any copyrights, as I've been working with a great artist, Super Citrus, to help with creating some of the enemy designs. A banger soundtrack is also in the works, but I can share more on that later. Overall, I learned a lot of really important things about taking feedback from people. I had players all across the spectrum, some who had never played a roguelike before, someone else who had over 2,000 hours in Slay the Spire, one of the main inspirations for my game. This is great to see how it appeals to different people and see pain points of new players to the genre, but it can also be a bit of a trap. You really need to be able to filter out all the comments people are giving you, which is something I really struggled with at the start. I felt a bit obligated to implement all these ideas people were giving to me, as they were taking time out of their day to play and test my game. But I needed to learn to be okay with just saying no to things. This doesn't mean you should just ignore feedback, But take some time to think on it or test implementing it, and if you still don't like it, you shouldn't feel any pressure to keep it. There's also a little bit of another trap mixed in there too. Especially in a community like the Playdate, which has a ton of developers and game designers, people often give their feedback in the form of solutions to a problem. While you may not like the solution they proposed, that doesn't mean their feedback wasn't important. If they're trying to give a solution, you need to reverse engineer and get to the root of what's really wrong with your game. And then you can come up with your own solution that matches your vision for the game. At the end of the day, as a solo dev, you're the project lead, and you have to make sure that when your game comes out, it isn't this mess of differing and competing ideas, but all the gameplay and design choices work together to achieve a common goal. You won't be able to design a game for everybody, so work to make it for the target audience you have in mind. As always, feel free to join the Discord in the description if you're interested in playing the latest demo build of the game. I think this will be the last video I make on this game until it's released later this year, fingers crossed, so if you want to stay up to date on the project, make sure to join the Discord. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.